Today I'm going to be painting this mountain path scene in autumn colors, and I've already started. And usually I block out the big shapes when I paint, but I thought I would try something a little different this time. I thought I would try to pick an area and paint it sort of to completion and then move on. One thing I wanted to try to do with this painting as well is to not zoom in at all. So when you see the camera zooming in here, that's me just cutting the video. I didn't actually zoom in. So when it pans back out, I painted the entire thing zoomed out. And the reason I want to do that is because if you zoom in digitally, it kind of makes you want to focus on pointless details, because you can see in minute detail, obviously, when we zoom in, you can see crazy amounts of pixels, but in real life you couldn't really do that, you know, if you're painting an acrylic painting or something. And I think it's quite unnecessary and wastes a lot of time, unless you're going to print this out like massive. You're not going to see those details anyway. So I'm painting this on a Wacom cintiq 21 inch, so I'm fairly lucky there that the tablet's probably large enough that I don't have to zoom in. Now, I understand if you're painting on a 11-inch iPad or something, you probably have to zoom in a little bit, but my point is to try and stay as zoomed out as possible in landscape painting so you don't get too fussy with the details. I often paint on my iPad, which is a 13-inch iPad, but it's still too small to do it all the way zoomed out, so zoom in a little, but only like 50% or something like that. Anyway, back to this painting. One thing that's quite nice if you're doing a landscape painting is to not have green fields or grass all the time. The green's quite hard to work with, and it gets a bit boring to use green constantly. So one thing I like to do is paint autumn scenes, because you can get away with them. They don't have to look autumn all the time, because if you drop some pine trees in there, they're usually evergreens anyway, so you'll get the green in there, but it won't be so overwhelming, and you'll have a nice color combination because the orange complements the blue sky as well, so you get quite a lot of nice color schemes for free, basically, without having to try too hard. Now, if you have green, it's not so bad because green is close to blue anyway, so it's all kind of one continuous color range then, but it gets a little bit boring. So you'll notice if you look at some old master painters, the landscape painters, they quite often don't paint green either. They're quite a lot of orangey grasses, and even if it is green, they push it towards the yellow oranges anyway. And there's some notable differences on some people who do a lot of green, obviously. But so anyway, if you want to use green, but it's again a bit of a struggle, if you look at the color wheel on the right there, I like using Photoshop. This is Photoshop I didn't mention, but you can see in the top left. Don't worry about what photo editing app you use, it doesn't really matter. I'm using one brush, and I don't even know what it is. It really doesn't matter. It's just a hard brush. It could just be the regular one. I find people get hung up on brushes too much, and it really doesn't matter. If you're having a problem trying to render something, it's not the brush that's doing that. There'll be another issue, and the brush is going to be one of the few things that make a big difference, unless you're using a weird brush. I mean, if you use one of the default ones, you can't really go too wrong. But I would say avoid the soft brushes because they look like an airbrush basically, and we're going for, or at least I'm going for anyway, is a bit more like acrylic type painting, you know, with no regular brushes, and you can't get that kind of super soft look easily anyway. So, and if you push it too far with the soft brushes, they will make it look like everything's out of focus. Now, you want that sometimes, but most of the time you don't. The soft brushes are great for when you're painting things like skin on people, or you know, very round objects and stuff. But in landscapes, the soft brushes are fairly useless, to be honest. So stay away from them. Pick hard brushes. There's nothing wrong with those, you know, fancy texture brushes if you want to use them. I find though that they create uniform patterns quite a lot, and it can look quite quite weird if you don't vary the brush techniques and things. So if you stick to the regular brushes and work out how to make your texture yourself quickly, then you just save a lot of time and a lot of faff trying to pick these brushes. And I'm forever losing these brushes anyway, so I always end up just using the default ones in the end. Well, to the point I don't even remember which ones I use. So brushes might seem like a big deal because they're all over the internet and you can buy thousands of them, and you know, people try and push them to make money, etc. But you really don't need them. They don't hurt, you know, so if you enjoy using them, I don't say don't use them, but I just make the point that I generally use the default brushes on any app. So I usually use Procreate. I just use the generic brushes. I use some other apps. So, and also don't get hung up on the photo painting app that you use either. Pretty much any of them can do the job. I say use the one you're most familiar with. I've used Photoshop for like 20 years now, and as much as it annoys me sometimes, especially the pricing model, which is not good for normal people, it does have some really good things, and I'm just used to it. And one of the things I was trying to get to is the one thing I like about it is when you make the side panel bigger, the color wheel scales and goes really big. Now that's really cool. There's some other apps where it doesn't really scale very nicely, and it drives me insane because the color wheel, especially for painters, is literally the most important thing that you have to use. Picking colors is hard enough when, you know, you're trying to get the right amount of color saturation and lightness and all that kind of stuff. And if it's too small, it's really difficult to pick it. So it's hard enough when it's really big. So I would say whatever app you use, try and make the color wheel as big as you can. You can't do that in Procreate either, I don't think. But it's fairly big, so they haven't really got that wrong. Now, there's a couple of apps where it's really tiny and you can hardly pick a color, and that's ridiculous. And there's one in particular, I won't name its name, and their advice was double click on it and it pops up another window. It's like ridiculous. So anyway, basically what I'm trying to do here is just add texture myself, because I'm not using texture brushes. You have to make texture yourself, which is really just making noise in various places. And I'm using all over the place a layer technique. So I'll always start with the darkest color on the bottom, and then I'll work my way up to light. Now that's an old technique from just traditional painting where I did acrylics for a long time. So you don't really have any choice when you're doing traditional painting, because obviously you can't paint underneath. You don't have, you know, actual layers. So that's the only way of working. But it works really well in digital painting too, and it takes out any complicated process you don't really need. So identify an area you want to paint, like a bunch of trees or whatever. Find the darkest color, always the darkest color, and if you're worrying about like, was this too dark, don't worry about too dark. It can go wrong if it goes too light, because if it goes too light, you can't really put the dark back in once you start putting the light on. So if you're gonna pick a dark color, just go to the dark side and then lighten it up as you go. It's much easier that way. So you know, I got the bulk of this in now. It's I keep it fairly messy. Again, I'm not zoomed in. That's just me zooming the video in so you could see what I'm doing there. So it's all zoomed out at this level. And so try that if you haven't tried it, because I guarantee it'll stop you doing pointless detail that you don't need to do. And that can waste literally hours with that stuff. And nobody's going to notice. So you want to spend your time on the things that people do notice, which is the big shapes and the color and the composition, etc., and the texture. Now, I'm just fiddling around. There's nothing special to what I'm doing. Again, I'm just using one brush. I'm going from dark to light, and it's all about the brush technique, really. You know, I'm not saying it's simple. It's definitely not simple, but the process is simple. So if you like that, give me a like and a subscribe, and check out my other videos. I got lots like these, and hopefully you'll find something of use. Thanks.